We caught a lot of games to scout and break down. We'll talk about Konsta Helenius, Cayden Lindstrom, Artyom Levshunov, and much, much more on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakesh, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be breaking down a bunch of games that we've scouted recently and kind of break down what we enjoyed from some of the prospects we've watched. We've got 6 prospects to cover in today's episode, so make sure to follow all along till the end. We'll talk first and foremost about Konsta Helenius and Cayden Lindstrom. In our second segment, we'll cover Artyom Levshunov and Liam Greentree. And then we'll end things off with Ryder, Ritchie, and Terik Parascak, all of which figure in the first round of both of our rankings and in Elite Prospects rankings as well. So make sure to follow along to the end and kind of follow along and see what we have to say about these high-end prospects. Before we get into it, just make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's Spotify, Odyssey, or wherever you get your podcasts, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So, Sebastian, first and foremost, as the head scout and, focus more on the European side, Konsta Helenius is one player that falls squarely within your area of expertise, and he's a player I've really enjoyed every time I've watched him. Talk me through what you saw from that game, how he performed, what he did well, and what kind of improved since your last viewing, because from what I understand, you got a bit higher on Helenius since that viewing, right?
Yeah, like Helenius has been impressing me my most recent viewings, and definitely I'm higher on him now than I have been the last time that we talked about him here on the podcast. Helenius, like the game I watched was when his team Ukraine played against TPS on November 1st, so a very recent viewing, and he really stood out throughout the game for making consistently good decisions. And that's not to say he didn't make any mistakes. He did make mistakes, but whenever he made a mistake, he bounced back impressively quickly. Whenever he turned the puck over, he was the first player on his team back on the puck, applying pressure, trying to get possession back. He was really, really impressive in that composure, in that ability to just immediately rebound from mistakes. And while he doesn't have the same level of like dynamism as you might see in some of the North American forwards, guys like Berkeley Catton, for instance, he is a highly intelligent player. He is very, very calculated in what he does. He's very, very good at buying himself time, whether that be circling back in the defensive zone if he doesn't like what he sees in transition, or whether just be deferring to teammates when he doesn't have much space to work with. He's very, very calculated, and he always prioritizes possession above all else. He's not an individualistic player, and while I'm not convinced he's going to be a center at the next level, there's definitely a chance he gets moved to the wing. This is a high IQ forward who I think has significant top 6 upside, and I think I would be open to having him in that like 8 to 10 range for us on our board in a couple days' time.
Yeah, I really like him as well. He's at 6 on my tentative board so far. I'm still working things out, making sure everything's clear and good on my rankings, but that's more or less where I have him. And yeah, every time I've watched him, I've just been blown away with his ability to show patience, poise, understanding of, when and how his teammates are going to access the offensive zone so you can hit them in stride. A lot of what we see from kind of junior quality players is, especially draft eligibles, is you'll see them push play down the boards as much as possible. Instead of being comfortable using a cutback to open up some space and kind of wait for things to develop. And that's one thing that a lot of players tend to struggle to learn at the NHL level is you don't need to rush every play. You don't need to push every puck down the boards. Sometimes going backwards is the best way to create offense. And Helenius already understands that, which is really impressive. I've also been really impressed overall with every viewing I've gone with just the 360 vision, the scanning habits, the awareness. He just fully understands what's going on around him at all times. And like you said, when he does make a mistake, he's aware that it's a mistake, and that's not where his mind ends. The moment a mistake is made, he's already in, okay, how do I patch this mode? So yeah, he's a developer in the pure sense of it, in terms of a player. He just develops plays really well. and whenever there's a mistake, he's quick to fix it. So yeah, I've been just overall really impressed with the package that Helenius brings to the table. And so far, you've had him. We were talking a bit before the episode, and you mentioned that you might like him more than Berkeley Catton. Um, with Berkeley Catton being as skillful and as intelligent as he is, you know, do you think that his skill set compares to Catton, or is it just that the offensive mind and the defensive engagement is a lot better to a point where you'd have him ahead of him?
They're in the same tier for me. I think with Helenius, you have the really impressive hockey mind and that composure, that overall just refinement in the mental side of the game. With
Yeah,
Cat, you have electrifying skill and dynamism. So they're different players in what they bring to the table, and also very different players in terms of projections and what they have to learn to become top six NHL players. Because if you combine the two, they basically be a very, very electrifying NHL player already. Almost like you have
yeah,
a like these two players do not share the same strengths necessarily, but I think with Catton, I haven't watched as much of him as I have with Helenius,
mm,
so it could be a thing that by default I just have Helenius above him a little bit right now for recency bias. So I'm not going to bend the table either way here for these two players. I think they're definitely within the same range, but I think I definitely side Helenius at this point because I'm always one to kind of bet on the hockey brain and the tools developing around that when
yeah.
there are of it. And with Helenius, there are certainly flashes of high-end offensive tools. It's far from as consistent and as overwhelming as it is with Catton.
Yeah, absolutely. Helenius reminds me a bit of kind of draft year Sebastian Aho, not the most kind of dynamic player, but super aware and super sound in terms of his decision making. So it'll be an interesting kind of progression for him. But let's talk real quick about Cayden Lindstrom, because Cayden Lindstrom was in the top 5 on Elite Prospects rankings. I'm not there yet.
Mm.
I tentatively have him at 10th overall. But you see him as a potential kind of, as a guy who could enter that tier with Parascak, Dickinson, and Eiserman, right?
Yeah, I tentatively have him at 8, but that's in a tier that stretches from 3 to 9. So,
Yeah.
there's some movement there for sure.
Mhm.
But I've watched a lot of him since that EP ranking came out, and especially with some conversations I had with some of the EP staff about him, where it was just a thing of like, oh, well, this is a player that like we could not really justify outside our top 5 range, let alone a player that like they were bullish on to have in there to begin with.
Mhm.
And so I went back and watched more tape, and I'm not quite as convinced as they may be at this point yet, but the tools are incredible. And for me, it's when you combine a tremendous raw toolkit that like Lindstrom has that we really haven't seen in the CHL center since Quentin Byfield, I guess, like in terms of pure toolkit. And he has the power, he has the playmaking, he is a highly intelligent player, he's super adaptable, he learns from his mistakes mid-game. And on top of that, his development trajectory is so good. This is a player who you go back 6-8 months and radically different player.
Yeah.
He has really revolutionized how he's played the game in the last half year, and it is so impressive. So if you're kind of charting that development track, I could definitely see an argument for him in our top 5 once we get to like those like December January rankings. So
Mhm.
I think as of right now, I'd be quite happy if he lands in our 7 to 10 range at Dauber. But with time, if this trajectory continues, I'll start banging the table for him a little bit higher up that board too.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is a pretty hefty tier that for me ranges from 6 to 12. For you ranges from 3 to 9. It's that
Yeah.
kind of range of players after you get, once you hit after celebrating Demidov, it's pretty much open season. A lot of people have Eiserman as the bona fide number 2, number 3 guy, but we're more in the mind that he's more in the tier of Parek, Dickinson ish. And that's the tier I have right now from 3 to 5 is Parek, Dickinson, Parek, and Eiserman in that order. Then from 6 to 12, it's just the whole glut of players as well.
It's
So it's
wide
going to be
open.
it's going to be a very interesting draft, even though the kind of high end upside isn't as present, especially as last year. I think that's still a pretty interesting draft if you're looking to add very specific pieces to your pool. So follow that along. And speaking of which, we'll continue on this 2024 kind of roll. We'll talk about Artyom Levshunov and Liam Greentree after these messages from our sponsors over at Jace Medical. Don't get caught unprepared. Jace Medical offers you 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use in the Jace case. All you have to do to get a Jace case is just fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, jump on a quick call with one of their board-certified physicians. And before you know it, you've got a Jace case coming in the mail your way to help you out if you've got an ear infection, nose infection, anything going on that you need immediate help with regarding antibiotics. They've got you covered and got you covered fairly quickly. With supply chain issues, with everything going on around the world, it's tougher than ever to get a reliable supply of medication, and Jace Medical offers that without a doubt. So like I said, don't get caught unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jace handles everything from online eval to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care and a lot more. So all you have to do is go to jacemedical.com/locked on. That's JASE medical/locked on to get started with $20 off your first purchase. Check it out. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about Cayden Lindstrom we already talked about Cayden Lindstrom. We'll talk about Artyom Levshunov and Liam Greentree in the second segment here. First and foremost, you caught a recent viewing of Artyom Levshunov, and you've gotten a bit higher on him. You've kind of hit the range that I'm comfortable with for Levshunov as well. Talk me through that, what you like about Levshunov, what's impressed you a bit more in these recent viewings, and still what are the limitations that would prevent him from being kind of a bona fide top 10 pick for you?
Yeah, he's a fascinating prospect, and I think that with time, my read on him has definitely shifted. I caught a recent game of his from, I think, last weekend, and he looked really, really solid with his in terms of his tools, his aggression. He was activating consistently, far more so than I was seeing in previous viewings. Constantly above the hash mark in the offensive zone, regularly supporting the rush as a third or fourth attacker, and overall being very, very involved. That said, his decision making has not been as good as it was my first viewing, and I think that I kind of may have slightly rapidly come to a conclusion with his IQ in that game, because it was a good viewing that I had early on in the season in terms of the mental side of the game, and the decision making has been weaker in recent viewings. So while I've been a lot more impressed with how he's using his body to either protect the puck or to initiate contact to create pressure or force a turnover, I think he's a lot more aggressive than he was beforehand. Those are all great things that I think kind of explain why he's climbing up my board. Like, those are all things I value a lot, especially in that like bigger defenseman mold. And that said, with the puck on the stick, I've seen him misfire on pass attempts rather than like the actual passing accuracy. Just a couple pass attempts that just didn't make much sense, that were just absolute Hail Marys, and where he really shouldn't have even tried them, especially against NCAA competition. Like, trying to go through like 3 layers of defense with a stretch pass from the defensive zone is a bit rich for my blood. But he's been good. I've liked him so far. I think that with that aggression popping up, with the defensive strength becoming a bit more visible in my viewings, I'm more comfortable with him in that top 15 range than I was previously. And while I still have some questions in terms of him as a top 10 talent in this draft class, I quite like him in that 12 range as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's more or less where I have him as well. I have him at 11 so far. The thing is, the main issue with Levshunov is he's got a lot of individual tools, not a lot of cohesiveness to his skill set, but on top of that, there's a lot of inconsistency with his decision making.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
we're talking about a player who is incredibly powerful for his age. He's already out muscling a lot of NCAA competition. Guys that are his size or even bigger, he's able to out muscle them, outwork them, and get pucks off boards. On top of that, the small area game is pretty interesting. He's able to make a 6-7 foot pass through a pair of legs onto a teammate's stick fairly confidently and fairly well. The only issue is as soon as he tries to spread the ice vertically or horizontally and make those kind of mid to long range plays, I feel like things break down for him a bit, both in terms of what passes he decides on and how accurate he is with them. So that's one thing that kind of keeps him outside of the top 10 range, but I just feel like the toolkit's really interesting. The shot is really good. And there are, even though it's inconsistent, I feel like the decision making when he's on is incredible. The understanding of, how play is going to develop, the anticipation of play is really advanced when he's on. But the issue is he's not always on. So as soon as that works out, I feel like we're going to see a different Levshunov. And I feel like as the sample size grows and as he gets more comfortable in the NCAA, because again, this is his rookie season in the NCAA, even though it's the CCHA division, still the NCAA. It's not the USHL. It's a different ball game. So I'm interested to see how that develops with a larger sample size as he plays, 30, 35 games throughout the season in the NCAA, how that's going to kind of shape out for him. But moving on to Liam Greentree, a player I watched very recently, last night actually. I was catching one of his older games from late October. He scored 2 goals and an assist in a 7-6 overtime loss. His team had a 5-3 lead late on. I don't think he was on the ice for either one of those third period goals from the opposite team to tie things up late. But yeah, what I saw from Greentree is a player who's incredibly comfortable on the playmaking side. He's able to draw a player in and hang on to pucks for a second or two long enough in order to open up a passing lane that wasn't there. He uses deception and manipulation and hook passes and slip passes. I feel like the playmaking arsenal's really wide, but I also was really impressed with his shot. His shot is very hard and very accurate, and he doesn't just try to hit the corners. He's comfortable hitting the spot under the arm. He's just comfortable hitting the 5-hole. He's very various in his shot placement, which is something I look for in shooting prospects. So he's got the playmaking side. He's got the goal scoring side. I'm not convinced with the skating. The motor is on and off, but the playmaking and shooting are really good enough. The handling's just kind of average. And yeah, I mean, you're talking about a player who's built physically. I mean, he's 6'2", 180, 185, something like that. So decently large in terms of his frame, not the best skater, decent puck protector, and on top of that has a really interesting skill set. I'm curious to see how things develop for him this year, especially if he can improve his skating as the season goes on, because I think that's going to change his projection a lot. But I kind of see the middle six upside here at the NHL level. And for me, that kind of puts him in the 20 range. I'm not too confident with him so far based on what I've seen, but I could see him becoming that middle six presence. And yeah, I've got him at about 22 so far just because I don't see that upside as being as likely as prospects ahead of him. But the upside is decent enough. So, if we're talking about a player with middle six upside, but, with fringe kind of potential to hit that upside, where does that land him in your rankings?
I like him quite a bit too. I've been really impressed with his brain. I think that his anticipation is really strong. I think that he's composed for a CHL player, and that stands out as an attribute.
Yeah.
I think that, as you said, he's various in both his shot placement, but I think that also kind of correlates to the rest of his game. He's very much not a player that falls into routines. He likes to change things up. He likes to get outside of his own comfort zone, and that's something I value in a prospect. Absolutely. Especially when it's a prospect in like the OHL who is starting off the season on fire and he's lighting things up. When a player is that hot, I want to see them experimenting. I want to see them trying to use that momentum to create new habits in their games and new strengths that they didn't know they have. And I've been seeing that with Greentree. He's experimenting. He's having fun on the ice. He's one of the more powerful CHL players that are first round contenders this year. I quite like his use of physicality. I think he's really good at initiating contact, and he's very, very calculated with how he uses it. So he's a player that I would also have in my 20 range. I think, as you said, the high-end tools aren't fully there. I don't think that there's a player who's going to drive any top six line, but I think there's an outside chance that he could be a physical, like tertiary piece on a top six line. And that's kind of where his upside kind of extends up to. And in terms of bottom six roles, there are many, many worlds in which Liam Greentree can fit in any type of bottom six role, because again, he is quite versatile. He can kind of plug and play, and the nice thing with that versatility too is that if he is like your number one guy on your third line, whenever you have a top six injury, you can kind of slot him in, and he can take over whatever role the injured player had, as long as it wasn't like the role of dynamic line driver. He'll be pretty okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Fully agreed on that. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll talk about Ryder Ritchie and Terik Parascak right after these messages from our sponsors over at Parkview Advance. As a business owner, you have to realize there are times when receivables might fall behind, but that doesn't mean that you need to fall behind on vendor payments, payroll, or even rent. For more than 25 years, Parkview Advance has helped businesses secure working capital from 5,000 to 1.5 million. Parkview Advance can approve your working capital as in as little as 24 hours. It's a much easier process than you can imagine. All you have to do is, if you're an entrepreneur that's a Locked On NHL fan, if you want to learn more, just call 203-675-0071 or go to parkviewadvance.com. If your business needs working capital, call Parkview Advance today. Parkview Advance, helping businesses with their working capital. Go to parkviewadvance.com. All right, so to end things off, we'll talk about Ryder Ritchie first and foremost. I think that this is a fantastic prospect who has really grown on me in recent viewings. I saw him at ninth overall on Elite Prospects rankings, and I was kind of curious as to why they kind of saw that top 10 upside in Ritchie, especially ahead of players that I have ranked ahead of him. He ended up in kind of my 15 to 20 range, and I think I'm pretty comfortable with that. I mean, Ryder Ritchie is another player who's he's built strong. He's not the biggest or the strongest. I mean, I think he's like 6'2", 185, 6 foot 185, something like that. Decently sized, but not overwhelming in terms of his physical toolkit. But I was really, really impressed with the playmaking abilities. He's a player that's really comfortable, distributing pucks quickly and accurately, but also he's able to draw players in and do all that good stuff that we look for. He's got decent hands. He plays a lot on the power play. Didn't see him much on the penalty kill. I think he got a shift or two, and it's for good reason. I mean, he's not necessarily the most defensively engaged. He sees the problems and tries, puts in a minimal amount of effort in order to at least get a stick in the right lane or, put his body in the right position or get in a board battle. But he's not going to blow you away with his defensive engagement and intelligence. But really, what you're getting out of Ritchie is a really good playmaking winger who can shift in at center. I think that his intelligence is good enough and his skating is good enough in order to have an impact at center. But yeah, what's your take on Ritchie and what do you kind of see as kind of the NHL projection for him?
I think the soft skill is very impressive with
Yeah.
Ritchie. Like, this is a player who uses his intelligence really well to kind of stay in pockets of space. I think that his off puck game could use a little bit more motor more consistently, but this
Yeah.
is a player who can find that soft ice really, really consistently. I think that he works really well within it. He's regularly a threat with the puck not on a stick, and that's what I like to see, especially in CHL players. You need to be dangerous off puck in order to kind of project as that like top 20 talent in any NHL draft. And with Ryder Ritchie, this is, again, he's very, very slick. I've really been impressed with how dynamic he can look in certain sequences. He plays with a ton of flash. He's a strong handler. He's a decent skater. He plays with pace when he wants to. It comes in flashes, not always there, but the high end flashes are very impressive. And I think if you look at them in a vacuum, the high end flashes can definitely justify a top 10 ranking. Like, this is a very, very, very skilled player. That said, I do have a lot of questions still that I think would impede him from cracking my top 15 at this stage. But I haven't watched as much of him as you have. And I know, like, I think like the last time I watched him extensively, like I logged like 3 or 4 views of him at the Plinka, and I thought that he was impressive, but still was left with some questions. But how has your take on Ritchie kind of shifted from that Plinka sample into the WHL this season?
Well, I saw a lot more of a kind of dynamic carrier. I saw a lot more pace to his game. I saw a player who definitely needs to improve the more kind of intricate elements of his game. He's still kind of raw and overall plays that kind of junior style at times. But I saw a player who's a bit more engaged, definitely more involved in all three facets and all three zones of the game. And you could see how he was working on his off puck movement. It was a bit of a concern at the start of the year. I didn't see as much kind of offensive positioning that could kind of benefit him in the WHL. He was kind of hitting pockets late and not readying his stick at the right moments. But the moment that I started watching him more, especially as the season went on, especially with this recent viewing I got in early November. You could really see a player who got a lot more comfortable with the off puck movement part of the game, and that's so essential for a player who can create space like he does for himself.
Yeah.
He's a player that moves really well off the puck right now, and the fact that that is paired with his physical abilities, with his understanding of his surroundings, with his one-touch play, it was so important for him to develop that off-puck game, because I feel like that's going to be mainly his bread and butter at the NHL level, is finding pockets of space and exploiting them. As much as I like his skating, and as much as I like his ability to move pucks in transition and switch lanes and all that good stuff, I still feel like at the end of the day, this is a player who's going to do most of the brunt of his work off the puck. So I'm really excited to see how that kind of develops for him. But finally, we'll talk about Terik Parascak. Terik Parascak really kind of came out of nowhere. Was playing kind of secondary line minutes on Prince George, behind players like Riley Heidt and Cohen Ziemer, and some of these guys that went really high in last year's draft. But man, is he popping off? I mean, every single game I expect him to kind of fall back to the mean, and he just exceeds expectations every game. This last game I watched against him was Ryder Ritchie versus Terik Parascak. It was Ryder Ritchie's Prince Albert Raiders were facing Prince George, and man, Terik Parascak is just, I tried to focus on Ryder Ritchie and get as much kind of my eyes on him as possible, but every time they were on the ice together, I was just mesmerized by Terik Parascak's intelligence, his understanding of his surroundings, his one-touch plays, his ability to play give and go. And there was one particular play where he scored a goal. I think Prince George ended up winning that game 5-0 or something like that. And there was one particular play where Terik Parascak scored a goal where he received a puck at the offensive blue line, in one motion, just toe dragged it around the player and just rifled it into the top corner. And the moment I saw that, my brain immediately went to Nick Suzuki, because I talked about this before, how Parascak reminds me a lot of draft year Nick Suzuki, but how Nick Suzuki revolutionized his game heading into the NHL. And that's, the changes that he's made are what actually make him such a good player. And not every player is going to have that development curve, but the combination of intelligence, hands, soft skill, one-touch play, off-puck movement, playmaking, there's a lot to like there with Parascak, and I feel like, for me right now, he's at 20, and I wouldn't be surprised especially if he keeps playing the way he has, and there isn't that regression to the mean, if he continues to show that this level of play is the level of play he's able to maintain, there's no doubt about it. He's going to end up in the top 15, but for me right now, he's squarely at 20. What's your take on him, though? What have you seen from him so far that kind of pushes you in that direction?
I haven't logged too many viewings on him yet, and I will definitely catch up on those today. I'm actually very excited to watch him today because,
Yeah.
You're a pretty good salesman when it comes to Parascak.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to really digging into the finer details of Parascak's game. But so far, I mean, I've been really impressed with his overall intelligence. I think that the combination of composure, anticipation, and planning is one of the better ones in this draft class that I've seen so far. And you also can't really shy away at that production. Like, this is a very, very impressive level of production. I mean, is he still leading all WHL draft eligibles?
I think so.
Is he still ahead of Lindstrom? Like, he's doing really, really well. And especially when you pair him with a player like Riley Heidt, oof, it's a lot of fun. I mean, like the flashes I've seen, I've definitely caught a couple passing viewings, casual viewings of Prince George so far, and seeing Heidt and Parascak together has just been a joy. Where you have Heidt with that high-end playmaking, the dynamism, the handling skill, the off-puck work rate, and then you have Parascak finding every single pocket of space that Height's dynamism creates. It's a really nice combination, and they complement each other very nicely. So, I mean, look, Parascak's in a nice position this season for his development. I think that when you are that type of player that kind of sits back, observes play, finds those pockets of space, you want to have highly dynamic wingers or line mates to play with, and he has exactly that. So it's a great little spot for his development right now, and it's been very entertaining to watch. So I'm quite excited to dig a bit deeper into that tonight.
Absolutely. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe, leave us a comment. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports. And make sure to tune in tomorrow as we talk about Marco Rossi, William Eklund, even Shane Wright gets a talk. I'll talk about all that on tomorrow's show. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.